She has preached to millions. She has filled stadiums on 6 continents. She has built one of the most powerful Christian organizations on the planet and turned her own suffering into a message of hope that has reached the farthest corners of the earth. But for all the faith she has proclaimed from the stage, Joyce Meyer has spent decades carrying secrets she never fully put into words. Secrets about her childhood, her money, her contradictions, and the complicated human being living inside the icon. Now, at 81 years old, she is finally confirming what the rumors have circled for years. And what she has chosen to reveal changes how we understand everything she built. Joyce Meyer is not simply a preacher. She is a phenomenon, a woman who transformed personal devastation into a global ministry, who took the wreckage of her early life and constructed from it something that has outlasted every critic, every scandal, and every attempt to diminish what she has done. Joyce Meyer Ministries reaches hundreds of millions of people across dozens of languages and platforms. Her books have sold more than 40 million copies. Her television program airs in virtually every country on earth. She is, by any measure, one of the most influential Christian voices of the last half-century. But behind the ministry, behind the message, behind the woman who stands confidently before a crowd of thousands and speaks about healing and victory, there is a story that most people only know in fragments, a story that begins not in triumph, but in an ordinary house in Missouri, where a little girl named Pauline was learning what the world was really made of. What no one realized at the time was how much of that little girl would survive into the woman Joyce Meyer became. She was born Pauline Joyce Hutchison in 1943 in St. Louis, Missouri, into a world shaped by war and its aftermath. Her father, a soldier who had served in World War II, was absent for significant stretches of her earliest years, away at war, then returning a different man than he had been when he left. When he came home, the violence arrived with him. Joyce Meyer has spoken about this openly in sermons and interviews, in the kind of frank and unflinching language that has become her signature. Her father subjected her to severe abuse. The details are painful. The consequences were lasting. And yet Joyce has chosen, again and again, to bring those details into the open. Not for shock, not for sympathy, but because she understands that somewhere in every audience, there is someone living through the same silence she once endured. This is the part most people never hear about. The decision to speak about abuse is never simple, especially for someone in a position of spiritual authority where congregations expect their leaders to project strength. But for Joyce Meyer, the willingness to say, "This happened to me," has always been inseparable from the message she preaches. She has said plainly that her suffering was real, that healing was not instant, and that the God she came to believe in was not indifferent to what she went through. That honesty, raw, sometimes uncomfortable, is a large part of why so many people feel that Joyce Meyer is speaking directly to them. Despite a childhood defined by trauma, Joyce did not pursue escape through bitterness. She found her way, slowly and imperfectly, toward faith. It was not a sudden transformation. She had not grown up with a strong religious foundation, but something shifted around 1976, during what she has described as an ordinary morning commute to work. Driving to her job, she heard a voice call her by name. She has called it her rebirth, the moment she understood that the course of her life was about to change direction entirely. Whatever one makes of such experiences, the effect on Joyce Meyer was concrete and permanent. From that morning forward, she committed herself to ministry. She started small, the way most significant things do. A Bible study class held early in the morning at a local restaurant. Humble, local, almost invisible. But the people came. Word spread through the community that this woman had a gift, that she could open scripture in a way that connected with real people living real lives. Her classes grew. Her reputation grew with them. She had not yet built anything institutional, but she had found her calling, and the calling had found her. But what happened next would change everything. Her growing influence brought her to Life Christian Center, a charismatic church in Fenton, Missouri, where she was eventually appointed associate pastor. It was a significant step, a formal position within an established institution, a platform that extended her reach beyond the informal Bible studies where she had begun. Her sermons resonated. The congregation expanded. By all accounts, Joyce Meyer was one of the primary reasons the church grew into one of the most significant charismatic congregations in the region. Her preaching carried a quality that was difficult to define, but impossible to miss. An authority that came not from formal theological training, but from lived experience, from the knowledge that she was speaking about things she had personally survived. The years at Life Christian Center were formative, but they were also a preparation for something larger. In 1985, Joyce Meyer made the decision that would define the next 4 decades of her life. She resigned from her position as associate pastor and founded her own ministry, initially calling it Life in the Word. It was an audacious step, leaving the security of an established institution to build something from nothing with no guarantee of success and every possibility of failure. Her husband Dave stood with her from the beginning, a partnership that would prove foundational to everything that followed. What no one realized at the time was the scale of what they were setting in motion. The radio came first. Joyce Meyer Ministries launched a daily program that aired on 6 stations initially, stretching from Chicago to Kansas City. The response was immediate. The audience grew faster than anyone had anticipated. There was something about the way Joyce spoke, direct, personal, scripturally grounded but never remote, that made listeners feel she was addressing them specifically, that she knew the particular shape of their particular struggle. By the time her program expanded to television in the 1980s, airing on major networks including WGN in Chicago and Black Entertainment Television, the audience was already primed. The reach exploded. On the surface, it looked like success. Underneath, something much larger was being constructed. The television program transformed Joyce Meyer from a regional voice into a national presence and then into a global one. She appeared on screens in homes where she could never have gone physically, reaching individuals who had no church, no community, no access to the kind of teaching she offered. The broadcast crossed geographic and cultural boundaries in ways that even a speaking tour could not have achieved. By the late 1990s and into the early 2000s, Joyce Meyer was one of the most recognized names in Christian ministry anywhere in the world. The books amplified everything further. Titles like Battlefield of the Mind and Enjoying Everyday Life became not merely bestsellers within Christian publishing circles, but genuine cultural touchstones. Books that people pressed into one another's hands, that sat on nightstands in hospitals and in prisons, and in the homes of people who had never set foot inside a church. What made them work was the same quality that made her broadcasting work: practicality. Joyce Meyer did not write theological treatises. She wrote field guides for survival. She told people how to think differently, how to fight the mental battles that determine whether a life is lived in bondage or in freedom. Millions of people found the framework they had been searching for in those pages. By the turn of the millennium, Joyce Meyer Ministries had grown into a vast international organization, running humanitarian programs, supporting orphanages, responding to disaster zones, and carrying its message to communities that had nothing to do with American megachurch culture. The scope was remarkable, the influence was undeniable, and the scrutiny, as always happens when influence becomes this visible, was coming. The first major wave of public criticism arrived in November 2003, when the St. Louis Post-Dispatch published an investigative report on Joyce Meyer's personal finances and the spending practices of her ministry. What the investigation described was jarring for many who had associated her message of faith with simplicity and sacrifice. A private jet valued at $10 million, a Mercedes-Benz purchased for her husband Dave, costing $17,000. Multiple properties worth millions of dollars, acquired for family members. The ministry's own headquarters had been built and furnished in ways that attracted intense scrutiny. Among the notable items flagged were a malachite desk valued at $300,000, an antique marble armoire priced at $20,000, and paintings with individual price tags ranging from $11,000 to $44,000. The truth, when it finally came out, was far darker than many supporters had expected. The questions the report raised were pointed. Was this how the resources of a Christian ministry, donated largely by ordinary believers, were meant to be used? The Christian watchdog organization Wall Watchers formally requested that the IRS investigate the financial practices of Joyce Meyer Ministries. A Christian television station in St. Louis that had previously broadcast her programs made the decision to drop them, citing what it described as her extravagant lifestyle and teachings that, in the station's view, sometimes overreached what Scripture actually teaches. The word prosperity gospel began appearing in coverage of her ministry, a theological framework that critics argued used the promise of divine blessing to justify material excess. Joyce Meyer's public response was characteristically unapologetic. She stated plainly that she saw no reason to apologize for being blessed. She maintained that her wealth was a testament to God's provision and that her ministry's effectiveness was not diminished by her material success. But in 2004, she did make a concrete concession. She announced that she would reduce her annual salary, which had reached $900,000, and that she would adjust how she received royalties from her books. This was framed as a gesture of accountability, an acknowledgement that the concerns of critics deserved some form of visible response. Behind closed doors, the story looked very different from the unified front the ministry projected. Then came something that no financial controversy could have prepared anyone for. On May 5, 2009, Christopher Coleman, a man who served as a personal security officer for Joyce Meyer Ministries, was arrested for murder. The bodies of his wife, Sherry, and their 2 young sons had been found in their family home. The crime drew enormous media attention and cast a shadow over the ministry that went far beyond any question of spending habits. Joyce Meyer testified during the trial. Christopher Coleman was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And then, without warning, everything collapsed into a far more complicated reckoning. In the aftermath, Sherry Coleman's family filed a civil lawsuit against Joyce Meyer Ministries, alleging that the organization had received credible threats directed at the Coleman family and had failed to take adequate protective action. The lawsuit was ultimately dismissed in 2013, and Joyce Meyer was not found to have been directly involved in the events that led to the murders. But the episode left its mark. The questions it raised about internal practices, about what the ministry knew and when, about the gap between the protective image it projected and the security failures the case seemed to expose, those questions did not simply disappear when the lawsuit was dismissed. In 2023, Joyce Meyer made an announcement that managed to surprise even those who thought they had heard everything from her. At the age of 79, she had gotten her first 2 tattoos. The revelation caused a genuine stir within Christian communities where tattooing has long been viewed as incompatible with biblical values. Joyce was unfazed. She explained that her decision was rooted in a specific passage from the book of Isaiah, chapter 49, verse 1, which she interpreted as affirming that personal expressions of faith are matters of individual conscience and should not be subject to the judgment of others. What no one realized at the time was how perfectly this moment captured who Joyce Meyer has always been. She did not ask permission. She did not seek consensus. She made a decision based on her own reading of Scripture and her own relationship with God, and then she told the world about it. This is, stripped of the specific context, exactly what she has done her entire life. Made choices that confounded conventional expectations, then explained them in terms that left little room for debate. Whether one agrees with her theology or her finances or her tattoos, the pattern is consistent. Joyce Meyer does not perform humility she does not feel, and she does not retreat from positions she genuinely holds. She has also revisited her financial decisions with more transparency in recent years. When Joyce Meyer Ministries faced its most serious scrutiny, she reduced her salary. She also made the decision to retain the majority of royalties from her books, which she had previously contributed entirely to the ministry. She was candid about her reasoning. Keeping those funds allowed her to support the ministry with greater personal stability, while also acknowledging that her work as an author had monetary value that she was entitled to receive. The response was divided. Some supporters accepted the logic. Others believed the decision contradicted the posture of sacrifice that ministry leadership is typically expected to model. But what happened next would change the conversation. Meyer did not shy away from discussing these choices. She reflected publicly on the early years of Joyce Meyer Ministries, when the organization had struggled financially, when she had doubted whether it would survive, when perseverance and prayer were the primary resources available to her. She described the growth of the ministry not as an inevitable outcome, but as a hard-won result of endurance through genuine uncertainty. And she acknowledged that the financial decisions she had made along the way, both the ones that attracted criticism and the adjustments she eventually offered, were part of a larger effort to ensure that the organization could continue to function with integrity. What Joyce Meyer Ministries has built over the course of 4 decades is, by any objective measure, extraordinary. The organization funds programs on multiple continents directed at disaster relief, support for orphans and vulnerable children, anti-trafficking efforts, and the provision of clean water and food in communities where those things are not guaranteed. It has brought aid to people in crisis who had no particular connection to Joyce Meyer's theology or her television program. People who simply needed help and found it through the logistics that a large, well-funded organization can mobilize. Whatever criticisms have followed the ministry's financial practices, the humanitarian work is real and its scale is significant. This is the part most people never hear about when the conversation turns to Joyce Meyer. Her books continue to sell in numbers that most authors cannot imagine. Battlefield of the Mind, first published in 1995, has remained in print for 3 decades and has been translated into dozens of languages. The core idea of the book, that the thoughts we habitually think determine the quality of the life we live, and that those thoughts can be changed through deliberate spiritual practice, has reached people who would never have described themselves as Christians and who nonetheless found something useful in the framework Meyer constructed. That crossover quality is rare in Christian publishing and speaks to something in Joyce Meyer's voice that transcends its specific theological packaging. Her marriage to Dave Meyer has endured for more than 5 decades, a fact she cites frequently as evidence of both personal commitment and divine grace. She has 4 children and multiple grandchildren. She has survived her father's abuse, a first marriage that failed, the founding of a ministry from nothing, decades of public scrutiny, a murder trial involving someone on her staff, and the kind of sustained financial criticism that has derailed other ministries entirely. She is still standing. She is still broadcasting. She is still filling rooms. On the surface, it looked like a story about a preacher. Underneath, it was always a story about survival. At 81, Joyce Meyer has confirmed the rumors. Not all of them, and not all at once, but enough to show that the public image and the private reality have always been more complicated than either her strongest defenders or her harshest critics have been willing to acknowledge. She is a woman of genuine conviction and significant contradiction. She preaches about humility while living in visible wealth. She teaches about healing while having been the subject of lawsuits and investigations. She advocates for the vulnerable while having been accused of failing to protect members of her own staff. None of this cancels the other. All of it is true at once. She has reduced her salary. She has retained her book royalties. She has gotten tattoos at 79 and explained them through scripture. She has testified in a murder trial. She has built a ministry that reaches more people than most governments can. She has spoken openly in front of thousands about being abused by her father, and then offered those thousands the tools she used to survive it. What do you make of these revelations? Do you believe Joyce Meyer has managed the criticisms and contradictions of her life and ministry with integrity? Share your perspective in the comments. If this story gave you something to think about, like and subscribe to stay connected to more stories about the people who shape the world around us. We will see you in the next one.